The Grumbles Plaque. Silas Grumbles droned a hum, a melody so uniquely off-key it could only be born of solitude. Sunlight, fractured by the leaded window panes, painted the air above his workbench with swirling dust motes. Gently, he cradled the wooden sign, his thumb tracing the carved legend, Grumbles. Each curve and line felt like a well-worn path in his mind, an engraving on his soul as much as on the seasoned oak. He'd hewn it himself, naturally, years back, not long after he and Martha had settled into the cottage. Martha had been adamant. It required a proper appellation, a stake in the earth. He'd countered that everyone in Oakhaven was perfectly aware who resided here, but she just offered that knowing smile and said, "It's for us, Silas, a promise we make to ourselves." He exhaled a soft breath onto the wood and rubbed it with a chamois softened by years of use, the same cloth that kept his chisels keen. The wood responded with a subtle sheen, the grain alight, the letters boldly defined. Vanity wasn't in his nature, not in the common sense of the word, yet his surname evoked an undeniable sense of pride. Grumbles. Not a name whispered with reverence like Ashworth or Featherstone, but undeniably his. Generations of Grumbles before him, all grounded, industrious, and steadfast. He'd always striven to embody that heritage. A faint waft of lavender, a phantom scent from Martha's windowsill posy, tugged at his heartstrings. He could almost conjure her laughter, like wind chimes in a summer breeze, dancing through the quiet air. He pictured the day he affixed the sign, her head cocked to one side, assessing his creation with appreciative eyes. "Perfect!" she declared, enfolding him in a warm embrace that banished the morning's chill. The withered posy remained untouched since her passing, a brittle elegy to what was gone. Silas sighed, the sound echoing in the hushed space. The cottage, typically a haven, felt cavernous, somehow larger without her. The familiar fragrance of wood shavings and beeswax, ordinarily a comfort, felt almost mocking in its ordinariness. He yearned for Martha's vibrant energy, her constant chatter, even her gentle chiding. He missed the way she'd infused the cottage with her very essence. He placed the plaque carefully on the workbench, amidst a jumble of chisels, gouges, and nascent sculptures. This workshop was his kingdom, a disorderly sanctuary filled with the implements of his passion. Delicate avian forms, carved from wood, adorned the shelves, their wings poised for flight. A nascent stag, still bearing the marks of his tools, stood guard in the corner. Bowls of all dimensions, each displaying the unique character of the wood, lined the walls. The atmosphere was saturated with the rich odors of cedar, pine, and the barest whisper of sawdust. He reached for a small, unfinished carving of a robin, its diminutive form blossoming under his practiced touch. He'd been crafting it for weeks, spurred by the sight of a robin building its nest outside his window. He'd intended it as a gift for young Lily next door, who adored the birds gracing his garden. But now, the thought of Lily only deepened the ache. A delightful girl, always so well-mannered and bright, yet a constant reminder of the family he never nurtured. Children had been Martha's dream, but fate had dealt them a different hand. Now, devoid of close kin, he felt like the last ember of the Grumbles lineage, the final chapter. The image of the plaque, so boldly declaring his name, felt almost like a judgment. What purpose did it serve, he wondered, if no one would perpetuate the Grumbles name? No one to inherit his tools, his craft, his ardor? He rubbed his hand across his face, feeling the rough bristle of his unshaven jaw. He hadn't shaved in days, lacking any impetus to do much of anything of late. The squabble with the Ashworths had resonated more deeply than he cared to reveal. The sting of their brusque dismissal, their offhand disdain for his feelings, still rankled. They'd scrubbed his name from their posh new development, branded him a relic of a forgotten past. A sudden surge of defiance ignited within him. He wouldn't permit them to break him. He wouldn't stand for the erasure of the Grumbles name. He might be aged, and he might be alone, but his pride remained intact. His skills were still sharp, and his resolve burned stronger than ever. He retrieved the plaque, clutching it tightly. This wasn't mere lumber. It was a symbol of his ancestry, his past, his very being. He refused to let it be sullied. He would devise a way to ensure they remembered the Grumbles' name. He would make them rue the day they underestimated him. A disappointing visit. 3 vehicles, each a polished monument to affluence, ground to a halt on the pebbled drive, their arrival stirring a cloud of ochre dust that coated the Grumbles' sign like a funerary cloth. Silas watched from his porch, the weathered wood of his rocker digging into his calloused hands. First emerged Theodore, adjusting the impeccable lines of his bespoke suit. Beatrice followed, a designer bag clutched tight, dark glasses perched high on her nose. Bringing up the rear, Penelope's face betrayed thinly veiled disdain as she took in the quaint cottage. "Father, really," Beatrice began, her voice a honed blade. "Must you bury yourself quite so far afield?" Silas simply arched a brow, a silent invitation for her to elaborate. Ever pragmatic, Theodore advanced. "We need to discuss something, Father. Situation." He shot a nervous glance at the sign overhead. Silas remained still, his quiet amplifying the mounting tension. He knew what was coming, a disquiet he'd felt simmering for years, cloaked in courteous calls and obligatory holiday appearances. Martha had always smoothed the waters, a vital buffer between his unpretentious life and their increasingly gilded ones. Now, with her gone, the inevitable confrontation had arrived. "It's the surname, Father," Beatrice finally declared, pushing her sunglasses up to reveal eyes laced with exasperation and a hint of mortification. "It's problematic." A pang shot through Silas's chest, sharper than the ache in his arthritic fingers. Problematic. A lifetime of honorable toil, a legacy of skill and honesty reduced to a liability. "My clients," Beatrice continued, her tone gaining momentum, "they see Grumbles and they form opinions. It's hardly conducive to sealing deals." A purveyor of luxury condos to the city's elite, Silas had never fully grasped the details of her profession, but he knew it involved endless chatter and outrageously expensive footwear. "And the benefits, Father," Penelope added, her nose wrinkling delicately. "Imagine introducing myself as Penelope Grumbles. It simply won't work. People giggle." An aspiring socialite, her days were a tapestry of charity events and meticulously curated Instagram posts. Silas suspected she devoted more energy to choosing attire than to genuine philanthropy. Theodore cleared his throat, an officious sound. "Father, we appreciate the sentimental connection to this house, however. It's time to consider its repercussions on our lives, our careers, our standing." Silas finally broke his silence, his voice a dry rasp. "And what precisely are you suggesting?" "We were hoping," Theodore offered, avoiding eye contact, "that you would consider removing the sign, or perhaps adopting a different name altogether." A wave of icy fury surged through Silas. He gripped the rocker's arms, knuckles bone white. This wasn't about nomenclature, it was about them. About their striving ambition, their shallow vanity, their utter dismissal of the values he and Martha had labored to instill. "You want me to disown my past," he whispered, his voice raw. "To deny my very being, to rewrite our collective story." "That's not what we mean, Father," Beatrice countered, but her voice rang hollow. "Isn't it?" Silas rose, his joints issuing a symphony of creaks and pops. He felt suddenly ancient, a relic of a bygone age. Straightening, he mustered a strength he thought he'd lost. "This name," he stated, gesturing towards the plaque, "is more than just carved letters. It's my father's legacy and his father's before him. It's the identity Martha embraced with pride. The identity I will bear until my final day." He met each of their gazes, his own filled with equal measures of sorrow and disappointment. He saw not the accomplished professionals they presented to the world, but the vulnerable, insecure children they remained, craving validation from a society that prized appearances over integrity. "You are welcome to visit," he continued, his voice resolute. "But if you arrive intending to malign my name, to shame my heritage, then perhaps it's best you don't come at all." He turned and retreated into the cottage, leaving them to stand amidst the rising dust, their luxury vehicles gleaming under the harsh glare of the sun. The door closed with a soft click, the concluding note on a visit that had left Silas feeling utterly isolated. His gaze lifted to the Grumbles sign. It stood firm and resolute, a silent pledge that he would not allow them to erase him. An empty space. Silas retreated indoors, the echo of his children's visit a palpable weight on his shoulders. He moved with deliberate slowness, husbanding his strength for the task ahead. From the kitchen drawer, he retrieved the Phillips head screwdriver, its metallic chill a stark contrast to the heat of his inner turmoil. For a protracted moment, he stood before the door, transfixed by the wooden sign. Grumbles. It proclaimed in bold, hand-carved letters, each groove a testament to his heritage, his pride, his very essence. Martha flashed into his mind, her delicate hands meticulously smoothing the wood, her eyes alight as she painted the letters a vibrant red. A wave of grief crashed over him, swift and brutal. Fingers trembling, Silas aligned the tool with the screw. The first refused to budge, its head worn smooth by years of exposure. He exerted greater pressure, the metal whispering against the aged wood. His knuckles protested. He paused, inhaled deeply, and tried anew. The screw yielded this time, turning with a protesting creak. He repeated the action, each partial rotation a sharp pang of sorrow. Tiny splinters blossomed around the screw holes, a miniature act of desecration. With the final screw loosened, the plaque dangled precariously, sustained only by his grasp. Silas's eyelids fluttered shut. He envisioned Martha's hand covering his, guiding, reassuring. He recalled her easy laughter, her unwavering faith in humanity, even when he faltered. Opening his eyes, a solitary tear carved a path down his time-worn face. Gently, he detached the sign. It felt far heavier than its size suggested, burdened by memories and unspoken grievances. He cradled it briefly, tracing the carved script with his fingertips, before placing it carefully on the scarred kitchen table. It landed with a muffled sound, the noise magnified in the stillness of the house. Above the door was an empty rectangle of lighter wood, untouched by the relentless sun and rain that had weathered its surroundings. A vacant space, once proudly occupied by his name, his identity. A hollow ache resonated within Silas, deeper than any he had known since Martha's passing. It wasn't just the removal of the plaque, it was the erosion of connection, the severing of ties with his children, the stark realization that the values he cherished were now alien to those he held dearest. He recalled their cold, assessing gazes, their measured pronouncements, the barely concealed disdain for his unpretentious existence. They had arrived not as family, not bearing comfort, but to demand capitulation, to dismantle the very core of his being. He contrasted this with Martha's boundless warmth and acceptance. She had never judged, never attempted to reshape him. She had embraced him entirely, flaws and all. He pictured her tending her beloved roses, a cheerful melody on her lips, her smile as radiant as the summer sky. Silas leaned against the doorframe, his limbs heavy with weariness. The void above the door seemed to expand, a gaping wound in the fabric of his life. A constant reminder of his children's rejection, their abandonment of the family legacy, their repudiation of his very self. His mind drifted to the will, tucked away in the drawer alongside the screwdriver. Composed years prior, in a moment of hopeful optimism, it divided his modest estate equally among his offspring. Now he contemplated its destruction, the creation of a New Testament. A spark of defiance flickered within him. He would not be vanquished. He would not allow their petty ambition to obliterate his history. He might be aged, he might be isolated, but he remained Silas Grumbles, and he would harbor no shame in his name. He drew himself upright, a newfound determination hardening his features. The empty space was not a void, but a challenge, a clean page, a chance to redefine his legacy, to reclaim his identity. He would discover a means to fill it, to render it a monument to his ideals, his heritage, his enduring spirit. He would not permit them to triumph. He was a Grumbles, and he would not be silenced. The dusty will. The key was a frigid shard in Silas's palm, unlocking a time capsule rather than a drawer. He hadn't breached the bottom recess of his roll-top desk since Martha's gentle hectoring about organization still echoed in the workshop. With a protesting rasp, the lock surrendered. Sunbeams, fractured by dust, illuminated a chaotic trove. Defunct pens, fading receipts, and sepia-toned memories, all layered beneath years of gathering stagnation. A stifled cough escaped him as he sifted through the detritus. Finally, obscured by Martha's dog-eared gardening catalogs, he found it. A manila envelope, its edges tattered and thin. Boldly typed, the declaration stared up at him. Last will and testament of Silas Ebenezer Grumbles. He extracted it gingerly, as if handling spun glass. Settling into his armchair, the will felt dense with unspoken burdens. Hesitation gnawed at him, a sense of impending disruption. Opening it felt akin to stirring up long-dormant sediment. Yet, the Ashworths' recent visit, their words like polished daggers, had instilled a stubborn resolve. He wouldn't be cowed, not even by his own flesh and blood. A fortifying breath later, the brittle seal broke. The parchment emitted a dry rustle as he unfolded it. There it was, in crisp, legal prose, a detailed inventory of his life's harvest and its intended distribution. The house, the workshop, the modest savings, even Martha's insured carving tools, all meticulously bequeathed to Richard and Eleanor Ashworth. His gaze lingered on their designations. Richard Ashworth, Esquire, and Eleanor Ashworth Smythe, Maryland. Accomplished, admired, and emotionally distant to a fault, the irony was a stinging nettle. He, Silas Grumbles, a humble artisan, had dedicated himself to their advancement, fueling their ambitions, only to reap indifference, bordering on disdain. A bitter tang flooded his mouth. Each clause he reread felt like another shovelful of dirt on a cherished illusion. He had envisioned this document as a final act of paternal affection, a safeguard for their future well-being. Now, it mocked his naivete. He slapped the document onto the nearby table, the sound amplified in the quiet workshop. Rising, he approached the window, his gaze drawn to the riotous garden Martha had so lovingly nurtured. He imagined her gentle chiding, "Silas, focus on the good, family is all." But Martha was gone, and family, he now understood, could wield a sharper blade than any stranger. He faced the will anew, his eyes hardening with a newfound determination. This document, this symbol of obligation, was a fabrication. It didn't represent his heart, his present circumstances. It was a fossil from a time when he clung to the unwavering strength of familial bonds, a belief that had shattered like a poorly fired clay pot. He lifted the will, his fingers tracing the contours of his children's names. A glint of impish rebellion sparked in his eyes, a flicker he hadn't felt since his youth when he'd run off with Martha, defying her family's objections. He was Silas Grumbles, after all. Not some senile codger to be dismissed and overlooked. He still had agency over his narrative, his legacy, and he intended to rewrite the ending. A fresh will was in order. One that mirrored his current reality, one that celebrated kindness and authentic connection, not entitlement and scorn. He wouldn't bequeath his life's work to those who saw him as a tiresome encumbrance. He would find someone or some people who merited it. Those who recognized the value of simple treasures, who appreciated the artistry in a carved bird or the warmth of shared companionship. Those who offered a smile without calculating the return. He settled back into his chair, the outdated will still grasped in his hand, a rough draft for the future he now sought to sculpt. His mind began to whir, weighing the possibilities. It wouldn't be simple. He'd require a lawyer, a discreet one, and absolute secrecy. The Ashworths couldn't learn of this, not until the decisive moment. A nascent smile played on his lips, a genuine, almost mischievous smile. The vision of their reactions when they discovered their inheritance had evaporated, replaced by something immensely satisfying, though yet undefined. He had a plan brewing, and for the first time in years, Silas Grumbles felt a pulse of hope, a sense of purpose that transcended the grief and disillusionment that had become his daily bread. He was more than an aging man awaiting oblivion. He was an artist, an innovator, a maverick, and he was about to carve a brand new destiny for himself, one will at a time. New friends. The bell above Mrs. Gable's bakery door jingled a cheerful welcome, a stark contrast to the leaden silence of Grumblewood. Silas, his stomach surprisingly empty, inhaled the warm, yeasty aroma. It had been years since he'd bothered with anything beyond toast and tea. "Silas! Well, isn't this a pleasant surprise? Mrs. Gable, a woman built along the lines of a well-fed robin, beamed at him from behind the counter. Her hands, dusted with flour, were perpetually busy. The usual butter cookies? "Extra warm, if you please, Millie," Silas replied, managing a small smile. He watched as she carefully selected a dozen, their golden surfaces glistening. "And Millie, tell me, how's young Timmy doing? Still terrorizing the neighborhood with his slingshot?" Millie chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "He's got a good heart, that boy. Just energetic. He's been asking about your carving, Silas. Says he wants to learn." Silas felt a surprising warmth spread through him. Does he now? Well, maybe I'll have to show him a thing or two. Tell him to stop by Grumblewood sometime. He paid for the cookies, the coins feeling lighter in his pocket than the purpose that had suddenly filled his chest. As he left, Mrs. Gable called after him, "And Silas, don't be a stranger." He raised a hand in acknowledgement, the scent of butter cookies clinging to his coat. Later that afternoon, true to his word, Timmy appeared at Grumblewood, a whirlwind of scuffed knees and boundless energy. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching a piece of gnarled wood almost as big as himself. "Mrs. Gable said you might, maybe, show me how to whittle?" he stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Silas, who had been staring absently at a half-finished robin carving, gestured for him to come in. "Well, Timmy, that's a mighty ambitious piece of wood you've got there. We'll start with something a little smaller, eh?" He spent the next few hours patiently guiding Timmy's clumsy hands, showing him the proper way to hold the knife, the gentle pressure needed to coax the wood into shape. Timmy, surprisingly focused, listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. Silas found himself explaining not just the technique, but the feel of the wood, the way the grain spoke, the stories it held within. He hadn't felt this engaged, this alive, in years. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when Timmy finally held up his creation, a lopsided but undeniably recognizable wooden bird. His face was flushed with pride. "It ain't much," he mumbled, "but I made it. It's perfect, Timmy," Silas said, and he meant it. "Perfectly yours." The next day, Silas found himself walking towards Old Man Fitzwilliam's house. Fitzwilliam, a retired gardener with hands gnarled like ancient roots, had always been a fixture in the village, a silent observer of the changing seasons. Silas hadn't spoken to him in any meaningful way since Martha's passing. Fitzwilliam was bent double over a patch of struggling tomato plants, his back a testament to years of tending the earth. Silas watched him for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Afternoon, Fitzwilliam," he said. The old man straightened slowly, his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, blinking in surprise. "Silas? Well, I'll be. What brings you out this way?" "Thought I might lend a hand," Silas said, gesturing to the overgrown weeds that threatened to choke the tomato plants. Fitzwilliam looked at him skeptically, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. Lord knows I could use the help." They worked in companionable silence for the next few hours. The only sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, and the occasional grunt from Fitzwilliam as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn weed. Silas found a quiet satisfaction in the simple act of weeding, in the feel of the cool earth beneath his fingers, in the scent of damp soil and ripening tomatoes. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Fitzwilliam leaned on his spade, his breath coming in short gasps. "You know, Silas," he said, his voice raspy, "Martha always said you had green fingers. Shame you never used them." Silas looked at his own hands, calloused and stained with earth. He hadn't thought about gardening in years. Martha had always been the one with the green thumb. But as he looked at the neatly weeded rows of tomato plants, at the promise of future harvests, he felt a flicker of something new bloom within him, a quiet sense of belonging, of purpose, of connection. Maybe, Silas said, a smile playing on his lips. Maybe it's not too late to learn. Whispers and worries. The mingled aromas of petunias and damp earth clung to Silas as he ambled towards Grumblewood, a familiar ache pulsing in his lower back. It was a satisfying throb, though, a testament to his continued vitality. His success in reviving a struggling Rose for Fitzwilliam had even earned him a toothless grin and a mug of tepid tea. Unbeknownst to him, Theodore lurked just beyond the boundary, concealed by a riot of overgrown hydrangeas bordering their estate. Earlier, when Silas had caught him loitering, slick, with an unnatural sheen despite the cool air, Theodore had offered a too casual, "just taking a stroll, father." Silas had simply acknowledged him with a dismissive nod, but Theodore hadn't moved, frozen like a gargoyle sculpted from apprehension. Now he watched Silas vanish within Grumblewood's shadowed grounds. 10 minutes ticked by before he began to creep along the perimeter, his gaze flitting about with furtive unease. He needed to know what his father was up to, alone inside that crumbling mausoleum. Soon he detected voices, a murmur filtering from the direction of Silas's workshop. He edged closer, peering through a gap in the verdant screen. He saw Silas, back turned, conversing with a compact woman in a practical tweed suit. She clutched a briefcase and wore spectacles perched precariously on her nose. He strained to decipher their words. "The Revised Testament, Mr. Grumbles. Are you quite certain about these amendments?" the woman inquired, her tone hushed and businesslike. A glacial dread seeped into Theodore's veins. A Revised Testament? Amendments? This spelled trouble. He slipped away as silently as he'd come, the coarse hydrangea leaves snagging at his expensive suit. He had to alert Beatrice and Penelope. The following afternoon, Beatrice's pearl-white convertible, a gleaming anachronism against the backdrop of neglect, sent a plume of dust swirling on the long, unkempt driveway. She carried an oversized box, meticulously swathed in wrapping paper. Silas, absorbed in patiently sanding a piece of cherry wood, offered only a fleeting glance. "Father!" Beatrice announced, her voice amplified by the workshop's echoing space. "I brought you a little something, a token of my affection, really." Silas paused in his work, sandpaper still in hand. "Affection?" he queried, one eyebrow arched. "That's a novel concept coming from you, isn't it, Beatrice?" Beatrice plastered on a saccharine smile. "Don't be like that, father dear. I've been thinking of you. You've seemed so isolated." She deposited the box on a nearby workbench. "It's a new espresso machine, state of the art. I know how much you use to relish your coffee." Silas's gaze remained fixed on the box, its polished surface mirroring the workshop's muted light. Martha had always been the one to make his coffee, a comforting, quiet ritual. He hadn't so much as looked at the old percolator since her passing. "I prefer tea," he stated bluntly, "and I've had little need of caffeine since I began retiring with the sun." Beatrice's smile wavered. "Oh, well, perhaps you could donate it then. To Timmy Gable, perhaps? He certainly looks like he could use a jolt." She nervously adjusted the strap of her designer bag. "Theodore mentioned you were occupied." "Occupied?" Silas chuckled, a mirthless, rasping sound. "Yes, Beatrice, I'm occupied. I'm occupied with living, something you all appear to have conveniently forgotten I was capable of." Penelope's approach, while indirect, was equally transparent. She arrived on foot, clad in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, attire utterly foreign to Silas's memory of her. She toted a bucket and a sponge. "Father," she began, her tone unusually subdued. "I thought I might lend a hand around the house. It could certainly use some attention." Silas leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. "You? Cleaning?" He paused for effect. "The last time you handled a sponge, you nearly flooded the downstairs bathroom. Something about exploring fluid dynamics, as I recall." Penelope visibly winced. "That was ages ago. I'm far more responsible now." She gestured vaguely with the bucket. "I thought I might begin with the windows. They're terribly opaque." Silas scrutinized her, his gaze unwavering. He saw the manufactured eagerness in her eyes, the awkward way she clutched the bucket as if it were a foreign entity. He saw not a daughter offering genuine assistance, but a clumsy attempt to ingratiate herself. The windows are perfectly serviceable, Penelope, but a clumsy attempt to ingratiate herself, he declared. They allow sufficient light for me to discern what truly matters. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. And at present, immaculate windows are not a priority. The hushed anxieties were amplifying, their concerns growing sharper. He could practically taste their desperation, a saccharine, heavy presence. And Silas, for the first time since Martha's death, felt something beyond grief. He detected a subtle, firm satisfaction. He held their undivided interest now, a dinner invitation. The invitations were crisp, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with a stylized carving of an oak tree, a design Silas had used for Martha's memorial. Each was hand-delivered by Mrs. Vactree. Higgins, the housekeeper, who, despite her gruff exterior, seemed to relish the dramatic weight of the task. "Mr. Grumbles requests your presence," she'd announced, her voice tight with barely suppressed excitement. "At a dinner this coming Saturday, 8 o'clock sharp." The formality was a stark contrast to their recent strained interactions, adding a layer of unsettling mystique. Silas, meanwhile, was orchestrating the evening with a meticulousness bordering on theatrical. He'd cleared out the formal dining room, a space rarely used since Martha's passing, and instructed Mrs. Higgins to polish the silverware until it gleamed like a king's ransom. He personally selected a damask tablecloth, a heavy ivory fabric with intricate floral patterns, and directed the placement of each crystal goblet. The centerpiece was a towering arrangement of white lilies and deep red roses, their fragrance almost overpowering. He spent the afternoon in the kitchen, a place he usually avoided, meticulously following Martha's recipe for roasted pheasant with wild mushroom stuffing. The air filled with the rich, earthy aroma of simmering herbs and roasting game. He even attempted, with limited success, to recreate her signature apple tart, its sweet scent a bittersweet reminder of happier times. This wasn't just a meal, it was a performance, a carefully constructed stage setting for the revelation to come. Theodore, Beatrice, and Penelope convened at a cafe earlier that afternoon, their usual insouciance replaced with a nervous energy. "Did you see the invitation?" Theodore said, stirring his coffee with unnecessary force. "The oak tree. It's practically a pronouncement." Beatrice smoothed down her designer dress, her expression a mixture of apprehension and avarice. "Pronouncement of what, exactly? He hasn't breathed a word about anything." Penelope, ever the pragmatist, tapped a manicured nail against the table. "He's going to announce the contents of the will, obviously. Why else would he go to such lengths?" "But why now?" Theodore pressed, his voice laced with anxiety. "After all this time, and after I made such an effort to compliment his carvings." Beatrice rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, your effort was transparent. I, on the other hand, have been genuinely interested in his health." "You brought him prune juice, Beatrice," Penelope pointed out dryly. "That's hardly endearing." "It's practical," Beatrice retorted. "And besides, I inquired about his arthritis repeatedly." They fell into a tense silence, each contemplating their individual strategies and their potential rewards. The air crackled with unspoken accusations and thinly veiled resentment. "What do you think he'll do?" Theodore finally asked, breaking the silence. "Will he divide everything equally? Or will he be vindictive?" Penelope sighed. Knowing father, it could be anything. He's always been unpredictable. She paused, her gaze distant. "Remember how he used to tell us those strange stories? The ones with the talking animals and the hidden treasures? He always loved a good twist." Theodore shuddered. "Let's just hope this twist doesn't leave us empty-handed." As 8 o'clock approached, Silas stood at the head of the long, polished table, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He heard the faint sound of approaching cars, the rustle of expensive fabrics, the carefully practiced greetings. He was ready. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. The reading of the will. The dining room shimmered, not with genuine warmth, but with the reflected light of 1,000 tiny crystals dangling from the chandelier installed just yesterday at Beatrice's insistence. She'd argued it brightened the space, but Silas knew it was meant to impress, to scream wealth and good taste. Things his children now desperately associated with the Grumbles name they'd so readily abandoned. Theodore arrived first, his bespoke suit a shade of gray so subtle it practically whispered, "Expensive." He kissed Silas on the cheek, the scent of his cologne, something sharp and metallic, lingering long after he'd moved to hover near the buffet table. Beatrice followed, draped in velvet, the color of a bruised plum, her diamond earrings flashing like miniature searchlights. Penelope, ever the showman, made the grandest entrance, a swirl of emerald silk and breathless apologies for being terribly, terribly late. Silas observed them, these polished strangers who bore his blood, and felt a pang of something that wasn't quite sadness, not quite anger, but a heavy, weary disappointment. They settled around the mahogany table, each vying for Silas's attention, showering him with compliments on the roasted pheasant, the vintage wine, even the meticulously arranged floral centerpiece, Martha's favorite lilies. Silas merely nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He allowed them their charade, their desperate dance of affection, for he knew what was coming. After the last plate was cleared and the remnants of the lavish meal removed, Silas rose. The clinking of silverware against china ceased abruptly, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. He walked to the antique credenza, its surface gleaming with beeswax and years of careful polishing. From within its depths, he retrieved a thick, legal-sized envelope, sealed with wax. He held it aloft, the candlelight glinting off the waxy surface. "As you know," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "tonight is about more than just a family dinner. It is about the future and the past." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Theodore shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Beatrice dabbed at her forehead with a lace handkerchief. Penelope's painted smile seemed strained, almost brittle. Silas walked to the head of the table and carefully broke the seal. The sound was sharp, decisive, like a final judgment. He unfolded the document, the crisp paper crackling in the quiet room. He adjusted his spectacles, deliberately prolonging the moment, savoring the anticipation etched on his children's faces. He began to read, his voice clear and resonant, each word carefully enunciated. He read the preamble, the legal jargon, the formal declarations, all with the same measured cadence. Then he reached the heart of the matter. "To my dear friend and neighbor, Mrs. Gable," he read, pausing for dramatic effect, "I bequeath my entire estate, including the house, the workshop, and all its contents, as well as my savings and investments." A collective gasp rippled around the table. Theodore's face flushed crimson. Beatrice's hand flew to her throat. Penelope's eyes widened in disbelief. Silas continued, his voice unwavering. "To Timmy Gable, in recognition of his kindness and unwavering friendship, I leave my collection of antique tools and a sum of money sufficient to secure his future education." The silence that followed was deafening. It was broken only by the faint whirring of the chandelier's tiny motor. Silas pressed on, remorseless. "And finally, to old man Fitzwilliam, for his years of loyalty and companionship, I leave a lifetime supply of his favorite pipe tobacco and a generous annuity to ensure his comfort in his remaining years." He lowered the document, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his children. Theodore was the first to break the silence. You can't be serious," he sputtered, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're leaving everything to them?" Beatrice's carefully constructed composure crumbled. "This is absurd," she shrieked, her voice rising in hysteria. "After everything we've done for you?" Penelope, ever the pragmatist, attempted a more measured approach. "Father, please," she pleaded, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're not thinking clearly. You're grieving. This isn't what Martha would have wanted." Silas merely smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down their spines. "Oh, I assure you, my dears," he said softly, his eyes gleaming with a newfound spark. This is exactly what Martha would have wanted. A matter of kindness. The silence was a palpable thing, denser than the savory aroma of rosemary lamb. It pressed down on them, a stifling shroud of shock and resentment. Amelia shattered it first. "You can't be serious," she shrieked, her polished composure cracking like thin ice. "You're just giving it all away? To them?" With a jerky gesture, she indicated Timmy, lost in the labyrinthine patterns etched into his glass, and Mrs. Gable, whose hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles gleamed like bone. Charles, predictably, adopted a more controlled stance, though the pulse, hammering at his temple, gave him away. "Father," he began, his voice a silken threat, "this is unconventional. Surely there's been some misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, perhaps?" Silas leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile gracing his lips. The tempest was unleashed, and he felt curiously serene. "On the contrary, Charles, my mind has never been sharper. For years, I've observed your relentless pursuit of fortune and status, sacrificing familial bonds at the altar of ambition. I've longed for a simple gesture of compassion, a sincere expression of warmth, only to be met with veiled attempts to secure my estate." His gaze shifted to Amelia. "You haven't inquired about my well-being in months, Amelia. Your calls revolve solely around the fluctuating markets, the crippling taxes, the inconvenience I represent to your holdings." Then, turning to Charles, "And you, Charles, always so generous with your counsel, yet never with your support. Your visits consist of lectures on fiscal responsibility and thinly disguised critiques of my lifestyle." He paused, taking a measured sip of water. "Martha always said the richest treasure wasn't gold, but a loving heart. But it's rightfully ours." Penelope burst out, her voice shrill with indignation. "We're your children. We deserve it." Silas's smile vanished, replaced by a flinty glint. "Entitlement is a corrosive force, Penelope. It fosters apathy and breeds a sense of ingratitude. You deserved my love, my guidance, my support, all of which I offered freely. You are not owed my possessions. Those are earned, not inherited." He inclined his head towards Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Gable has been a true companion, unfailingly kind and supportive. She deserves more than mere acknowledgement." Then his eyes softened as he regarded Timmy, now wide-eyed with burgeoning comprehension. "And Timmy reminds me of myself at his age, brimming with curiosity and wonder. He deserves the chance to realize his potential, a chance that might otherwise elude him." Finally, his gaze rested on old man Fitzwilliam, his oldest confidant. "And Fitzwilliam, my dearest friend, has stood by me through thick and thin. He deserves a comfortable twilight." Tears shimmered in Mrs. Gable's eyes. "Mr. Grumbles, I'm at a loss for words. I only ever tried to be a good neighbor." Timmy, emboldened, chirped, "Mr. Grumbles, you're the best. You always make time to show me how to carve, and you never make fun of my questions." Old man Fitzwilliam simply nodded, his gaze unwavering and firm. "You're doing what's right, Silas. Martha would approve." Amelia shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is preposterous. We'll challenge this in court. You can't do this." Charles, ever the pragmatist, placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Amelia, please, let's not descend into hysterics." He addressed Silas, his voice regaining its persuasive timbre. "Father, I understand your frustration, but surely we can reach a solution. A scholarship for Timmy, a generous annuity for Mrs. Gable. We can discuss this with reason and composure." Silas's head moved imperceptibly from side to side. "There is nothing to debate, Charles. My decision is immutable." He pushed back from the table and rose, his gaze sweeping over his offspring, a blend of heartache and disappointment clouding his features. "I had hoped for a different legacy. I had hoped that one day you would grasp the enduring significance of family and generosity. But it appears—" He turned and strode towards the hallway, leaving his children dumbfounded and humiliated amidst the luxurious trappings of the dining room. The rich scent of rosemary lamb now felt cloying, suffocating, a pungent reminder of the superficiality that had poisoned their familial bonds. Only the rhythmic cadence of the grandfather clock in the hall sliced through the heavy air, a relentless testament to time squandered and opportunities forfeited. A chosen family. The judge's gavel slammed, the sound a death knell to their hopes. "Case dismissed," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of the law. "The plaintiffs have presented no viable claim against Mr. Grumble's will." A wave of dismay washed over the Ashworth siblings. Their meticulously crafted arguments, the exorbitant fees paid to their counsel, their unwavering sense of entitlement reduced to ashes in that one pronouncement. Barnaby's face grew florid, a pulse hammering at his temple. Penelope's meticulously applied lipstick seemed a fragile mask stretched too tight. Even Clementine, normally an embodiment of composure, looked as if she'd bitten into something profoundly sour. Silas observed them, a fleeting shadow of pity, though mostly satisfaction, gracing his time-worn features. He had anticipated this outcome, prayed for it even. He'd secured the services of Miss Phileas Davies, the county's most formidable attorney, a woman with zero tolerance for pampered fools. She dissected their case with surgical precision, exposing the utter lack of substance beneath their claims. Outside, the air thrummed with unspoken animosity. The Ashworths clustered together, their hushed voices sharp with resentment and disbelief. Silas, conversely, found himself surrounded by his own, smaller, yet far more vibrant entourage. Mrs. Gable's eyes shone with unfiltered joy. Timmy, clutching his beloved Treasure Island, sported a grin that threatened to split his face in two. Old man Fitzwilliam, using his cane as a steadfast anchor, offered a rare, gummy smile. "Well, Silas, Mrs." Gable exclaimed, her voice overflowing with gladness. "It seems justice has finally run its course." "Indeed," Silas responded, feeling a burden lift from his shoulders, a lightness he hadn't known in years. He turned to Timmy. "What say we celebrate with Mrs. Higgins' legendary apple pie?" Timmy's eyes sparkled. "The one with the extra dose of cinnamon?" "None other." The Ashworths, their expressions darkening by the second, watched as Silas and his unlikely compatriots ambled toward the town square. They were an unconventional bunch, an assemblage linked not by kinship but by mutual affection, regard, and shared laughter. A family by choice, Silas realized in that instant, worth more than any Ashworth and their mountains of inherited wealth. Later, as twilight painted the sky in fiery hues of apricot and rose, Silas relaxed on his porch. Inside, Mrs. Gable hummed a tuneless melody as she busied herself with supper preparations. Timmy remained lost in his piratical adventures, occasionally interrupting his reading with inquiries about doubloons and hidden maps. Old man Fitzwilliam snored contentedly in his well-worn rocking chair, a half-eaten apple clutched possessively in his hand. The fragrant promise of Mrs. Gable's pot roast wafted through the air, a homey aroma reminiscent of Martha's loving touch. A gentle breeze whispered secrets through the trees, laced with the chirping of crickets and the solitary call of a distant owl. Silas closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, and a profound sense of tranquility enveloped him. He considered his children, the Ashworths, devoured by avarice and their relentless pursuit of fortune. He pictured them now, undoubtedly plotting their next gambit, scheming to reclaim what they considered their birthright, and he felt nothing, no bitterness, no rancor, no regret. Simply a quiet acceptance. He had devoted so many years to forging a legacy for them, to ensuring their prosperity, to securing their contentment, but ultimately, it had all been in vain. They had disavowed his name, his principles, his very being. They had opted for ambition over connection, status over authenticity, but he, Silas Grumbles, had finally gleaned the crucial lesson. He had discovered that authentic happiness wasn't rooted in affluence or prestige or an esteemed lineage. It resided in life's simple gifts: a hearty meal enjoyed in convivial company, a child's unrestrained laughter, a kind deed, a helping hand extended without expectation. It resided in the bonds of friendship, fealty, and limitless love. It resided in a family forged by choice. Opening his eyes, he smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that illuminated his entire face. He was an old man, certainly, and he had undoubtedly stumbled along the way. But he was also a man who had, at long last, found his true path, a man who had unlocked the secret to true family. And as he watched Mrs. Gable setting the table, Timmy anticipate the roast, and old man Fitzwilliam maintain his slumber, Silas knew he possessed everything he needed. He was rich beyond measure, not in currency, but in affection and belonging. And that, he concluded, was a legacy outweighing all the gold imaginable.